I'm not the impulsive type. I make lists before every grocery trip, check the expiration date on milk, and even always remember to bring my own cloth bag. But that day, something I'd never written down happened. A turn I hadn't planned for. A single glance that changed the entire course of my life. I had just finished a night shift, arms full of groceries, fumbling for my keys in an oversized tote. Montana was colder than usual that day. My breath turned to mist as I stood in front of the local supermarket parking lot. While my head was busy juggling everyday thoughts, the electric bill, looming work deadlines, the ice cream starting to melt, I saw her. An old pickup truck sat parked just a few steps away. In its back, a metal crate. Inside, curled up as if trying to disappear, was a small creature, shaggy fur. Eyes like a winter lake, quiet, yet bottomless. We looked at each other for exactly 1 second. And in that 1 second, something squeezed tightly around my chest. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. I walked closer, not even sure why. Only when I reached the truck did I see clearly. It was a puppy. Though unlike any breed I'd ever seen. Thick black fur, amber gold eyes. Her gaze locked onto mine as if asking, "Will you walk away this time too?" An older man appeared from behind the truck, holding a paper cup of coffee. He glanced at me, then sighed. "She's been causing trouble at my ranch for weeks," he said, his voice raspy from the cold. "Killed 3 of my hens. But I couldn't bring myself to shoot her." I hadn't said a word yet, eyes still on the little girl in the crate. He went on, "I was gonna take her to the vet in town. Maybe they'll know what to do with her. But I can't keep her." There was a pause. And then, I heard my own voice speak. "If you don't mind, I can take her." I didn't know why I said it. I just knew that if I walked away now, if I let someone else deal with her, some part of me would never forgive myself. He looked at me, surprised and doubtful, as if trying to figure out whether I was crazy. "You sure? I don't know what she is. No one's been able to touch her all week." I nodded. I couldn't explain the feeling. Only that, in the eyes of that trembling little creature, I saw a version of myself from long ago. Someone who'd also been abandoned, doubted, and just needed someone to believe in her. I handed him a bit of money, not much, but enough to show I meant it. After a moment of hesitation, he nodded and opened the crate. She didn't growl. She didn't bite. She just looked at me, then pulled back a little, curling tighter. When he placed the crate in my car, he said one last thing before driving off. "Be careful with her. I don't think she's a dog. At least, not completely." At the time, I just laughed. I had no idea what was ahead. I didn't know what the name, Seiko, would come to mean in my life. I only knew I had chosen her. Or maybe, she had chosen me. I placed the crate right in the middle of the small apartment's living room. The dim yellow light reflected off Seiko's jet black, matted fur. She curled into herself, ears twitching slightly, eyes never leaving me. I knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. "It's okay, Seiko," I whispered, the name slipping out naturally, as if I had always known what she was called. "I'm not going to do anything. Just watch me, if you want to." That night, I didn't open the crate. I just sat beside it, one arm's length away, eating instant noodles, quietly talking to the air, or more precisely, to a creature I wasn't even sure was a dog. When I placed a bowl of water and some soft food just outside the crate and stepped back, Seiko hesitated, then moved forward. She sniffed me, slowly, deliberately. Every motion was calculated, not like a normal puppy, more like a wild animal evaluating an intruder. But then she ate. She drank. And for the first time, nearly an hour later, she looked me in the eye without recoiling. I was certain, in that gaze, there wasn't fear. There was something else. Deliberation. Silent acceptance. The next day, I gave Seiko a bath. I should have known right then, something wasn't normal. She didn't struggle, didn't whine, didn't tremble like other dogs I'd known. She just stood in the tub, still and quiet, the water running over her thick fur like she barely noticed it. As if she wasn't used to being cared for. Or perhaps, had endured worse. I gently worked through the knots in her coat with my fingers. Beneath the mud and tangles was a kind of wild beauty I couldn't ignore. Eyes like molten gold, sharply pointed ears that tilted like antennae scanning signals from another world. I don't know when I began to love Seiko. Maybe it was in that very moment. But then the strange things started. At night, Seiko didn't bark, she howled. A long, mournful sound that echoed through the thin walls of the apartment like a forest's cry drifting into the city. Neighbors started to complain, but I just bowed my head and apologized, offering no explanation. She didn't destroy furniture, didn't chew the mattress, didn't wag her tail like a normal dog. Seiko preferred to sit for hours by the window, watching the city lights, eyes unblinking, as if remembering something far away. Every morning, I'd find my clothes dragged into a corner, but not torn. They were rearranged, like a nest, a safe place, a den. I began searching online for large dog breeds, wild canine behavior, but nothing quite matched Seiko. Until one day, I took Seiko for a walk in the neighborhood park, like I always did, but that day, a young boy was walking a husky. When the husky approached, it froze, growled, not the playful kind of growl, but the kind that comes from instinct. The husky backed away slowly, while Seiko stood still, didn't growl, didn't pounce, just observed, but I could feel her energy shift, tense, alert. A woman nearby looked at Seiko, eyes wide. She pulled the child away and said loud enough for me to hear, "That's not a dog." I chuckled nervously, but that laugh didn't reach my chest. That night, I sat with Seiko for a long time. We looked at each other. No one spoke. Of course, she's a wolf. I'm a human. But I swear, she understood. And inside me, one question kept growing. What exactly am I raising? 3 months since bringing Seiko home, I no longer called her a puppy. Maybe because I already knew, even if I kept denying it. But the truth came faster than I imagined. That day, Seiko seemed tired. She didn't eat, lay motionless for hours, occasionally letting out a soft whimper. I panicked. To me, Seiko wasn't a pet anymore, she was family. A part of me. I wrapped her in an old blanket, placed her gently on my electric bike, and rushed to our usual vet clinic. Dr. Martin, the one who'd vaccinated Seiko when I first adopted her, greeted me with his usual warm eyes. But that warmth quickly vanished. He crouched down, felt each joint, lifted Seiko's paw, and paused. For a long time, saying nothing. Is something wrong, doctor? I asked. Dr. Martin glanced at me, visibly conflicted. Ashley, I need to tell you something, but take a deep breath first. My heart started pounding, while Seiko lay calmly in my arms, wheezing, unaware of the storm about to hit. She's not a dog, he said. You've been living with a wolf. The world stopped. Every image in my mind condensed into one. Seiko's gaze, blazing gold, primal, wild, and completely aware. A wolf? I repeated, unable to believe the words coming out of my mouth. Dr. Martin nodded. More specifically, Seiko is a North American black wolf, a very rare and intelligent species. She was probably separated from her pack young, or illegally raised by someone and then abandoned. Her growth, her behavior, her bone and tooth structure, they're unmistakable. My arms went numb. But I've raised her like a dog. Walks, baths, sleeping in bed. He placed a hand on my shoulder, voice heavy. And that's exactly why I need to be honest. According to state law, you cannot keep a wolf as a pet in a residential area. No matter how docile it is. I'm required to report to Wildlife Services. They will come for an inspection. I said nothing. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Report, inspect, confiscate. Those 3 words echoed in my mind like a sentence. Is there any way I can keep her? I asked, my voice cracking. Dr. Martin sighed. Only if you move to suitable land. Obtain a wildlife possession permit. Build proper enclosures, fencing, have the required facilities, and prove that you're capable of caring for her as part of a conservation program. I looked down at Seiko. She was resting her head on my lap, eyes half closed, unaware that her fate was now being weighed in signatures and clauses. I had promised to protect her. I couldn't let her fall into the hands of people who would see her as a biological risk or potential threat. I leaned down and whispered into her ear. We'll leave the city, okay? You're not a dog. You're Seiko. You deserve the sky. And from that very moment, our real journey began. 3 days after the appointment with Dr. Martin, I handed in my resignation. I sold the apartment I was paying off, liquidated my belongings, emptied my savings account, withdrew every bit from my retirement fund. All of it, for one thing only: to keep Seiko by my side. I wasn't running away. I was just looking for a place where the world didn't call Seiko dangerous. After nearly 2 weeks of scouring property listings, I found it, a nearly 15-acre stretch of untamed land, bordering the northern state forest. About 90 miles from the city. The house on it was barely a house, just a rotting wooden cabin. But the land was real. The forest was real. And Seiko deserved that. I named it Wilderage, a wilderness for Seiko to finally live by the instincts she had never been allowed to embrace. In the first week, I put up a temporary wooden fence, every post driven in by hand. I had never done gardening, let alone built a wolf-proof perimeter. Seiko ran circles around me on those blazing days. She sniffed every patch of earth, dug into tufts of grass, leaving muddy paw prints like she was sketching the map of her new territory. At night, we lay side by side beside the wood-burning stove. Wind howled through the gaps in the planks. Seiko often lifted her head and let out a soft howl, a sound so haunting it froze the air. But so beautiful it silenced the soul. It wasn't a bark. It was a call back to the forest. One night, I dreamed Seiko ran away, melted into the trees and never looked back. I woke up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, but she was still there, pressed against my back, warm, as if she'd never wanted to be anywhere else. The biggest problem wasn't fencing. It wasn't food. It was time. I had only 6 weeks. If I couldn't prove that the habitat met the required standards, Wildlife Services would confiscate Seiko and relocate her to a holding facility. Maybe they'd treat her well. But she wouldn't be Seiko anymore. So I studied everything, from how to dig proof fence anchors to the legal requirements for wild animal shelters. I watched every YouTube video made by wolf rescue experts. I sketched designs for a den with a gravity-fed water system, shade trees for cover, and even a dry nest zone where Seiko could hide away by instinct. I woke up at 5 a.m. every morning, went to bed at midnight. My hands blistered and calloused, knees scraped raw, shoulders always sore, but every time Seiko bounded over and licked my cheek after a long workday, every ache disappeared. Then, on a rain-soaked afternoon, I received an email from Carol, the field officer. Ashley, I'll be conducting the inspection sooner than expected, in about 10 days. I hope you're still making progress. We will need to make a final decision this time. 10 days. I stood in the pouring forest rain, hands trembling, vision blurred from rain and tears. Seiko came running over, soaked, mud streaking her shiny black coat. She pressed her head into my chest and let out a long sigh. As if to say, "Don't give up." And I didn't. I didn't give up. I don't remember exactly what I wrote in that post. It was just one of those nights, too tired to swing the hammer, too drained to figure out how to reinforce another section of the fence. I sat on the cabin floor. Seiko was curled up next to me, breathing softly in her sleep. I took a photo of her lying next to my old hoodie, the one she carried around like a sacred treasure. And then I wrote, pouring out everything breaking inside my heart. I rescued what I thought was just an abandoned dog. But she is Seiko, a wolf. I broke the law out of unconditional love. I'm not asking for money. I'm not demanding anything. I just want to keep a piece of the wild that chose to trust me. And I don't know how to hold on to this miracle without losing her. I hit post, and the world answered. By the next morning, the post had been shared over 40,000 times. Messages poured in, not just from friends, but from strangers, veterans, biology teachers, people who grew up around wolves, people who once raised foxes, people who had lost pets and saw themselves in my story. An older man in another state, retired from construction, wrote, "Send me your enclosure plans. I've got leftover materials and time. Just need an address." A single mother messaged, "I don't have money, but I can weld. I want Seiko to run in a real yard." Then came the architecture students, the volunteer vets. A group from an animal rescue nonprofit donated an entire set of specialized steel mesh, the kind used to secure wildlife enclosures. A crowdfunding page appeared, created by a stranger. Its only headline, "Help Seiko stay with the one who loves her." In 3 days, over $47 was raised. Then something incredible happened. A bearded man drove a pickup from Ohio, over 12 hours, and parked in front of the cabin. He stepped out with a toolbox and a grin. I used to raise wolf dogs. He said, I understand. They deserve a choice. A couple showed up with a truck full of lumber, cement, and fencing. A veterinarian pitched a tent to give Seiko a wellness exam. People who had never met, from unfamiliar places, sat around a fire. Building fence posts, digging trenches, securing steel mesh deep into the earth. They talked about wolves, about freedom, about things that cannot be legislated, like trust and kindness. And Seiko, she walked slow circles around them. Not afraid, not growling. Her eyes watched each person. Then she came over and licked my hand. As if to say, we're being seen now, aren't we? I cried for the first time in weeks. Not from despair, but from hope. Hope that in this world, if you do the right thing out of real love, you are never truly alone. That morning was foggy and damp, as if the sky and earth were holding their breath with me. Carol, the wildlife officer who once knocked on the door of my tiny apartment to inform me, "You're harboring an illegal wolf," returned today with a thick folder and an unreadable expression. She didn't come alone. With her were two others, a federal wildlife behavior specialist and a representative from the State Department of Agriculture. 3 people, 3 clipboards, and me, standing on a piece of land filled with paw prints. Sweat, tears, and trust. Seiko was inside the temporary enclosure. She watched from a distance, silent, her golden eyes fixed on the strangers approaching. But she didn't growl. She didn't run. She just stood there, as if she knew this day wasn't just about her, but about everything. Enclosure perimeter? The first man asked. 867 feet. With mesh buried 3 feet deep. And a load-bearing roof net. There's 24/7 surveillance and a new drainage system installed last week. My hands trembled beneath my jacket. Any enrichment systems? The second woman asked. Sanctuary volunteers sent a proposal. We built wooden climbing structures, a den tunnel, scratching logs, and a natural pool lined with stones and native plants. Carol didn't ask anything. She walked slowly around the enclosure, her hand brushing the fencing as if reading it by touch. She paused at the double lock system, then looked up at Seiko, who still stood like a living statue. Unblinking. Medical records? The man asked again. I emailed scanned copies, but the originals are here. I opened my folder, fumbling slightly as the wind scattered some of the pages. They reviewed every item thoroughly, asked what felt like endless questions. Then, silence. We need to conduct a direct behavioral assessment, the woman said. My heart dropped. Behavioral? I echoed. We need to confirm that Seiko is not only stable, but safely responsive in this environment. Not to determine if she's a pet, but to ensure she isn't stressed, dangerous, or at risk. I nodded. Then I crouched and opened the enclosure gate. Seiko stepped out. No command, no coaxing. She walked straight to me, her head low, but there was no fear. Only the calm of a soul long familiar with being tested. I held out my hand. She pressed her head into my chest. Warm breath. Then, Seiko turned toward Carol, took one step. The middle-aged officer instinctively stepped back, then stood still. Seiko stopped 1 meter away, tilted her head, a familiar gesture. She was reading this human, not with her nose, but with instinct. No one said a word. Seiko didn't move closer. She turned, walked back to me, and lay down by my side. Eyes closed, a signal louder than words. She chose to stay here, with me, but she no longer needed to howl to be understood. Carol closed her clipboard. The enclosure meets standard, she said. Her voice was steady, but not cold. You've passed the technical requirements, the legal thresholds, and the most important one, proving that love isn't blind, it's resilient. I nearly collapsed. Then Carol did something I didn't expect. She knelt, looked at Seiko, and smiled gently. Little one, she whispered. Maybe this time, the world didn't lose a wolf. That day, I received the official document. A special permit for private wildlife custody. Stamped in red. Seiko would not be taken. She would stay here, in the home we, and hundreds of strangers, built together. The day Carol left my land with a confirming nod. I thought the journey had ended. But in truth, it was only the beginning. Because something strange happened the very next morning. When I posted a photo online, Seiko lying beside the newly finished fence. early sunlight glowing on her ash-gray fur like a fire quietly burning beneath. I added only a simple caption. She gets to stay. Thank you to everyone who didn't walk away from a wolf. I didn't expect that single sentence to spread like wildfire. Within just 48 hours, the post had been shared more than 100,000 times. And for the first time, I saw the name, Seiko the Wolf, appear as a symbol. Not of wildness being caged, but of compassion organized and protected by intelligence. Social media erupted. People began using hashtags. Hashtag keep Seiko home. Hashtag not just a wolf. Hashtag when love builds fences. A mother in Texas shared the story of her cat being separated from her autistic child because of exotic pet ownership laws. A veteran in Oregon posted a photo with a gray wolf dog he once rescued from a combat zone. I understand her. I, too, was once seen as unfit to reintegrate. But some wounds can only be healed by wild instincts. Seiko's story touched something deep in millions of people. Not just about animals, but about what it means to be misunderstood, misjudged, pushed aside because we don't fit a mold. Then the press got involved. CNN ran the headline. From confinement to freedom, the story of Seiko, the wolf who changed the law. BuzzFeed called her a symbol of humanity within a cold legal system. A Japanese TV station reached out, moved by her name, Seiko, which in Japanese means refined and sincere. I cried when I read that. Because I didn't choose the name for its meaning. I just felt it fit her, gentle, irreplaceable. The system began to open. Then I received an email from a state legislative council member. We're reevaluating policies on classifying wildlife in personal environments. Seiko's case has forced us to ask, are all special animals truly dangerous? Or are they victims of our bias? Less than a month later, the State Wildlife Commission hosted a public hearing, where I and people like me were invited to speak. I brought a small notebook. No big speeches. I just told my story. That one day, I met a wolf no one had ever loved. And that, when the world tried to lock her in, love chose to build a fence to protect her from within. One story, thousands of ripple effects. From Seiko's story, dozens of other caretakers came forward. About fennec foxes, savanna cats, rescued owls, ferrets denied care because of regulations. Many had no plans to keep them forever. They just wanted the right to care for them responsibly before finding the right habitat. And Seiko's case opened that space. A space where the law could work with compassion instead of against it. Seiko, from abandoned creature to ambassador. An international conservation organization reached out, wanting to name Seiko as the face of a new educational campaign on keeping and understanding special animals. Not because she's special in the cute, performative sense, but because she carries the look of freedom in every step. Even while living behind a fence, Seiko is still a wolf. Not tamed, not easy to train, but full of sensitivity, and loyal to the connection we built together. And me? I'm just someone who once lost her way. Once thought I couldn't protect anything. And then a small wolf, in a plastic crate, made me choose myself again. We don't need to be experts to love well. We just need the courage not to look away when a pleading gaze meets our own. That autumn morning, the mist lay low across the ground. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee cup still steaming in hand, my eyes on the final fence line, where Seiko moved with slow grace. Her tail brushing across the damp grass. She didn't look at me, but she knew I was there. Her walk was no longer that of a creature who had merely survived. It was the walk of a being chosen to live fully as she was meant to. Free, but not alone. And I realized, she was giving that back to me, too. I no longer lived to rescue. I lived to walk beside. In the beginning, I thought I was the savior, the protector, the one standing against a cruel system to shield a wild soul. But it turned out, Seiko was never a victim. She was a mirror. She reflected my fears, my quiet strength, and the wild part of me I had long forgotten. I used to think, she needs me to survive. Now I know, I need her to live truthfully. A home no longer means shelter, it means welcome. After the permit was granted, I worked with a team of specialists to transform the land into an open sanctuary. Not just for Seiko, but for other, misplaced, creatures. A fox once kept as a pet and discarded. An owl with a broken wing. Wolf pups rescued from illegal breeders. Each one came here not to be retrained, but to be understood from the beginning. I named the place Seiko Haven, as a reminder that true sanctuary is not a cage, but the trust we build together. The children came, carrying the seeds of change. We launched a program called Wild Hearts for local students. They came, sat beside the fence, and listened as I told the story of the first night I slept on the floor beside Seiko. Just so she would know, I wasn't going to leave. I asked them one question. If a creature is misunderstood their whole life, just because of their species past, do they still deserve a chance? And the children, without hesitation, answered, yes, if adults stop being afraid and start learning to listen. From one wolf, we began rewriting the language of trust. Seiko became the unofficial symbol for several local wildlife protection efforts. People began to propose models of bonded but instinct-honoring care. At the second state hearing, I was invited again to speak. But this time, I didn't bring a prepared speech. I brought Seiko. She didn't perform. She didn't growl. She simply sat, head lifted, eyes calm. A legislator behind me whispered, "I've never seen a wild animal with such a human presence." I smiled, because I knew she didn't have a human presence. We had just forgotten that nature, too, has a face, one that loves, trusts, and hurts. That night, Seiko slept under the porch. I sat beside her, wrapped in an old blanket, surrounded by cricket song and her steady breath. I opened my laptop and typed the first lines of a book I never thought I'd have the courage to write. She is not a dog. She is a piece of the world I forgot I belonged to. And I knew, from that moment forward, whenever someone asked me about Seiko, I wouldn't say I rescued her. I would say, who is Seiko? She is the first being who taught me that love isn't holding on. It's building a world where we're both free.